if they want to try to annihilate Ontario, I will do everything, including cut off their energy, with a smile on my face.
Better deal from Canada, but, you know, it's up to them. They're going to have to pay a lot of tariffs and things. They're going to have to pay a lot of money for the dome, for the Iron Dome. They want to be a part of it.
The U.S. just doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50% overnight. It wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't even a warning shot. It was a political explosion aimed straight at North America's most stable trade corridor. Within 48 hours, the ripple effects were already visible. Containers loaded with U.S.-bound aluminum were turned back at the port of Vancouver. Detroit's auto plants scrambled to find high-strength steel as order sheets were revised midweek. Futures on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange surged past circuit limits. And now all eyes are on July 16th, the day Ottawa and Washington will meet to determine whether this is a short-term tariff clash or the beginning of a full-scale industrial rupture. This isn't just about metals. It's about what happens when the backbone of a 40-year trade relationship suddenly cracks on live television. The shock didn't stay on paper. It tore through factory floors, shipping yards, and procurement offices on both sides of the border. In Michigan, auto assembly lines began running short on Ontario's high-grade steel material critical for frames chassis and EV battery enclosures. Ford's Dearborn plant reportedly paused 2 production shifts within a week of the announcement. In Chicago, aviation suppliers scrambled to locate new sources for aluminum alloys normally imported from Quebec. With aerospace deadlines fixed and raw material uncertain, procurement departments were forced into emergency sourcing at a premium. Meanwhile, Canadian infrastructure projects backed by federal stimulus funding suddenly hit supply walls. Contracts that depended on U.S. specialty metals, bridge trusses, rail components, structural beams were either paused or completely rerouted to domestic alternatives. It wasn't just about tariffs anymore. It was a chain reaction testing the limits of integrated economies. The most telling sign: long-haul freight traffic at the Windsor-Detroit crossing the busiest commercial land border in North America dropped 12% in the first 2 weeks. Not because demand vanished, but because trust did. This isn't a symbolic rupture. It's logistical chaos playing out in real time. And it's just the beginning.
At a minimum of 30% on Chinese products.
For the month of May, we had expected 17 additional ships, but those were canceled. And they were traditionally our nonstop services coming out of China. That was a big deal.
Canada didn't just hit back. It escalated with discipline and strategic foresight. When President Trump stunned markets by doubling tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50%, Ottawa didn't waste time with dramatic press briefings or fiery speeches. There was no war of words, just a quiet rollout of policy precision. The centerpiece: a first-of-its-kind automatic tariff mechanism and innovation in trade retaliation. Instead of requiring Parliament to vote each time tensions escalate, Canada now lets tariffs adjust automatically. If the U.S. drags its feet in negotiations, Canadian duties on American metals rise in preset intervals. If Washington offers exemptions or begins to reverse course, Canada scales back in kind. No red tape, no delay. It's an economic thermostat adjusting pressure in real time based on diplomatic climate. The U.S. wanted leverage. Canada built a pressure system. But the most disruptive move wasn't even a tariff. It was electricity. In a sharp but calculated strike, Ontario imposed a 25% surcharge on power exports to Michigan, Minnesota, and New York, 3 U.S. states that depend on Canadian energy for up to a third of their electricity supply. This includes hydro and renewables that power everything from hospitals and public transit systems to heavy industry and municipal services. No prior warning, no public threats, just an overnight price shock that rattled local utility boards and governors alike. It wasn't a loud retaliation, it was silent leverage. And it sent a clear message: Canada may be your neighbor, but it's no longer your backstop. At the same time, Ottawa rewrote the fine print of how Canada builds. All federal infrastructure, from high-speed rail projects to new ports and bridges, must now use Canadian melted and Canadian cast steel and aluminum. The melt-cast origin rule is more than a bureaucratic tweak. It effectively ends the long-standing loophole where U.S. companies imported low-cost Chinese or Russian metals, processed them in U.S. mills, then sold them into Canada labeled as North American made. That door is now closed, permanently. This policy wasn't designed just to punish. It was engineered to insulate. It's part of a broader blueprint, one that doesn't rely on retaliation alone. Instead, Canada is reshaping its industrial architecture. It's eliminating dependency, closing legal gaps, and rewriting procurement law to support long-term self-sufficiency. The playbook doesn't scream, it acts. And every action sends ripples through binational supply chains, corporate procurement plans, and energy markets. In essence, Canada has done what most allies rarely dare to do: use its strategic resources, not just materials, but policy and regulation as hard leverage against Washington. This isn't just about fighting back, it's about rewriting the terms of economic engagement. And if the US doesn't respond soon, it won't just lose a trade dispute, it may lose its most stable and predictable trading partner.
Well, if I can be honest, I'm terrified. I'm up here, which is, I'm safe for now. But I feel like a lot of people in the U.S. understand that what's happening in the United States right now is very similar to what was happening in Germany in the 1930s.
Canada's answer to Washington's 50% tariffs wasn't just about hitting back, it was about rewiring the entire architecture of its industrial future. At the center of this transformation sits BETCO, a $10 billion tariff credit fund designed to protect strategic manufacturers from sudden cash flow shocks. But Ottawa didn't stop at emergency relief. To access the funds, firms must file detailed northern border relocation plans outlining how they'll reduce dependency on U.S. metals by reshaping sourcing toward Canadian mines and mills. It's not just damage control, it's industrial policy in motion. That industrial pivot quickly expanded. Ottawa revised over $24 billion in federally backed infrastructure projects, including clean hydrogen pipelines, naval shipyards, and high-speed rail bridges to mandate the exclusive use of Canadian-origin metals. But the definition of Canadian isn't just a label. Under the new melt and cast rule, steel must be smelted and formed in Canada or within a certified value chain of allied partners. U.S. companies using foreign input rebranded as Made in USA are now disqualified. Contracts are shifting, mills in Ontario are rehiring, and unions have announced thousands of new postings across the metal sector. The reforms also introduced targeted quotas and procurement filters, quietly but effectively ending Canada's reliance on external supply chains for key structural inputs. It's a return to strategic planning, something not seen since the 1990s, where public investment decisions are directly tied to national industrial security. This isn't a short-term tariff chess match. It's a blueprint to build an autonomous metal ecosystem where Canadian ore is smelted in Canadian furnaces, shaped in domestic factories, and used in federally funded projects under a shield of economic sovereignty. The goal isn't just to protect against U.S. volatility. It's to future-proof Canada's industrial heartland job by job, plate by plate, bridge by bridge. Ottawa isn't reacting anymore. It's engineering the next supply chain model from the ground up. The real shift isn't just happening in policy rooms, it's playing out in factories, ports, and shop floors across the country. At the Port of Vancouver and Port of St. John, customs officials have redirected inbound U.S. containers flagged for failing to meet new melt cast origin standards. What once flowed seamlessly across the border is now held up by dual traceability forms, chemical origin certifications, and alloy content audits. For many importers, paperwork, not politics, is now the biggest supply chain barrier. In Montreal, the ripple effects triggered rapid reinvestment. Local sheet casting plants are importing precision equipment from Germany to produce advanced nickel-chrome alloys materials once sourced cheaply from U.S. firms. The reason new federal procurement rules disqualify foreign-made components unless Canadian vendors can't meet the specs. Rather than lose contracts, Quebec's firms are upskilling, retooling, and going upstream in the value chain. Ottawa isn't just protecting jobs, it's creating entirely new industrial capabilities. Meanwhile, 5 federal sectoral action tables now meet weekly to track and respond to market disruptions across steel, aluminum, auto machinery, and public infrastructure. These panels include government officials, labor unions, and private sector reps providing real-time intelligence on price spikes, export bottlenecks, and capacity shortfalls. It's a permanent version of Canada's COVID-era emergency supply response, now repurposed for economic sovereignty. Together, these shifts represent more than friction. They're evidence of a country turning crisis into coordination, where each redirected shipment and upgraded factory signal the emergence of a new economic operating system. Canada isn't just reacting to tariffs, it's redesigning how its economy moves, trades, and grows. As Ottawa restructured its domestic steel and aluminum landscape, allies across the Atlantic and Pacific quietly synchronized their next moves. In Brussels, the European Commission unveiled a coordinated safeguard measure, a so-called steel shield designed not only to absorb diverted Canadian exports, but to deter US-based rerouting efforts. European customs authorities began tightening inspection regimes and expanding port infrastructure to handle the redirected volume. Behind closed doors, French and German officials lobbied the European Investment Bank to accelerate green steel financing, ensuring EU producers wouldn't be left behind in a shifting global metals race. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, policymakers saw opportunity in Ottawa's realignment. Japanese trade officials proposed precision aluminum shipments to fill the void left by disrupted US imports. By offering high-grade semi-finished aluminum to Canadian aerospace firms, Japan aimed to reinforce its strategic footprint in North American supply chains, subtly countering Beijing's regional dominance. Together, these moves signaled more than friendly cooperation. They marked a deeper pivot, a geopolitical realignment of raw materials and industrial ties. No longer centered around Washington, the new flow of metals from Berlin to Tokyo, from Montreal to Marseille, reflected a shift in trust. Nations weren't just reacting to tariffs. They were proactively re-engineering trade lanes, building redundancy, and crafting new economic alliances based on predictability, not proximity. The result? A quiet eastward migration of the global metal supply chain, one that leaves the US more isolated and North America no longer the undisputed core of industrial gravity. This is no longer just about steel or tariffs, it's the unraveling of a decades-old promise that North America would rise and fall together. The recent trade clash has triggered something far deeper in Ottawa. Canada is no longer simply retaliating, it's rebuilding from the ground up. The emerging strategy: an end-to-end national metal ecosystem, from nickel in Sudbury to steel poured in Hamilton to rail lines laid with domestic alloy. Canada is charting a future that no longer assumes Washington's cooperation. Across parliamentary chambers and procurement tables, new laws are codifying this independence. Made in Canada is no longer a slogan, it's becoming a requirement. Energy policy, defense contracts, infrastructure planning, everything is now being filtered through the lens of sovereignty and self-supply. The ripple effects aren't just economic, they're political, strategic, and cultural. And yes, Washington is feeling the pressure. But what's coming next could be even more consequential. If you want to stay ahead of what this means for every factory, power grid, and job in the US and Canada, subscribe now, share this video, and stay tuned. Next, we break down how Europe is capitalizing on the split and what it means for the balance of power across the Western world.